think something that could give a little bit more of, I guess, clarity on all of this as a whole and what exactly we're talking about is taking a look at some of the biblical figures a little more closely. We've picked, well, I kind of cheated. I picked 3. And Lauren picked 1.
It's the same story though.
It is the same story, so it's not that.
Yeah. Well, we just picked characters that, and we did this in the Sunday morning class where everyone chose a character who had confidence, that in their story you could see like this person was confident because of this and this, and we kind of did a synopsis. So we're just gonna do the same thing here for you. And obviously we can't go through the whole stories of them, so I really recommend that you read the stories yourself.
Oh, and another thing before you go on to Esther, right? What we like is for you guys to, I mean, if you kind of want like a little bit of a cheat, go into Hebrews chapter 11. Is it? Yeah, Hebrews chapter 11, and that's going to give you, I mean, that is, what's it called exactly? It's like the faith,
the Hall of Fame of Faith.
Hall of Fame of Faith. I
and
like
basically it talks about Old Testament characters who were strong in the faith. Basically the book of Esther is about so the king in that day had a wife named Vashti, I believe.
Yes.
And he basically was having this banquet or this party and has asked Vashti to come in and entertain the men there. And she said, nope, I'm not doing it. Not going to happen. So the king banned her from the kingdom and was now looking for a new woman. So he basically had this pageant for all the young women in the kingdom to come, and he was going to pick out his next wife. So Esther was a Jewish woman. She has a cousin named Mordecai, who is really important to the story. And Mordecai kind of sent Esther to go to the king. And whenever she went to the, I guess, gathering of the women, the king liked Esther and chose her as his queen. So Mordecai, her cousin, decided to stay outside the kingdom gates and basically keep an eye on her, and told her, don't mention that you're a Jewish woman, and just leave it at that. So he stayed outside the kingdom gates, watched her. He overheard 2 of the king's servants plotting to kill the king. So Mordecai got word back to the king that this is going to happen. The king took care of the servants who were planning to kill him and wrote it down in his chronicles, in the king's chronicles. So later on, there is basically a right-hand man of the king named Haman, who he went outside the city or the kingdom gates and told these people to bow to him. And Mordecai was like, no, it's not happening. I'm not bowing to you. So Haman hated him, despised Mordecai, and hated the Jews. So Haman went back to the king and kind of manipulated his way into putting an order out that all the Jews would be killed. And when the word got back to Mordecai, he told Esther, look, you need to use your power to stop this from happening. And Esther was kind of like, oh, I don't know about this. Like, I'm gonna get killed if I do this. And I wanted to read real quick from Esther chapter 4, Mordecai's response to her. So he says in chapter 4, verse 13, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. So he's basically telling her, you're a Jewish woman, you are the queen. Who are you to say that you weren't put in that place, being a Jew, to save the Jews? So Esther's like, okay, you right. So she went to the king, which that's a big deal. That's a huge, like, she was courageous for doing that, because she went to the king without being summoned. She could have been killed just because of that. But he loved her so much that he was like, okay, come in, tell me what troubles you. And she let him know what was going on. To make a long story short, Haman was killed, and Mordecai. It was all good. The Jews didn't get killed so that the lineage could go on.
Yeah.
So I think there's two characters in the story who have a lot of confidence. Mordecai, obviously, because he stood up and said, no, I'm not going to bow to you, Haman. And Esther, because she ultimately listened to him and she convinced the king not to kill her people.
Yeah. So, in other words, Mordecai was kind of like infectious in a way.
He was.
His confidence
He
was infectious. Yeah, standing up straight with your shoulders back is very infectious, especially if you're applying it to your Christian life. And I feel like that's very important. Is yes, we think it's silly. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. You're being my parents again. Stop that. It's very infectious. And we encourage you to do so and understand that. Think of it like this, right? For all of you out there that are parents, you have your kids, look at how much they look up to you. That's a testament to how much, that's a little smidge of insight into how much more people are looking at you and seeing how you hold yourself up as a Christian. So that was very great. I love the story of Esther, and I love the way you talk about it. It's always been very, very interesting into me, because you really just you get into it, and it's obviously someone that you connect with. And I guess the biggest thing for me and why I chose Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is their level of, like, we look at it as blind faith, like this sense of, oh, I'm going into it and I don't really know what's gonna happen, but I'm gonna go into it anyway. But that's not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego at all. Really, a lot of what it is. There's a truck passing, by the way. We have a lot of distractions out, but it's such a beautiful day that we just couldn't help ourselves.
Well, it's Kate and Jed, and I'm kind of hoping they don't stop to say hi. I would
happen.
love for them to stop and say hi.
We would.
But don't want to stop this video.
We love you, Kate and Jed. We do. Yep, there you go. We see you there. If you're watching this video, hi. Whoa. That was a bad voice crack. I would cut that out of the video, but you guys know me already too well, so that's gonna stay in just for you guys. All right, so anyway, getting back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. For those of you that don't know exactly where that's located, you can use Google, or I'll just tell you it's in Daniel chapter 3. That was another attempt at being funny. My apologies. Again, you all know me, so you're gonna have to deal with it. So, with that being said, Daniel chapter 3 goes into Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and if you don't know the story, I guess a little snippet would be there was these gods that the king wanted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to bow to whenever.
Idols. I would say idols.
I mean, it says gods, but yeah, it's
okay,
essentially.
Then I wouldn't say idols. I would say gods.
Well, they are idols in a sense. I mean, you're right. You're definitely right, because they're not really God, but that's what they said. It was gods, and they're essentially what they are is it is idolatry. So it was every time that it was a trumpet. There was several other instruments, but no, it was a horn, a flute, a harp, a lyre, and some other stuff. It was basically when music sounded off, everybody had to get down and they had to bow to these gods. And so essentially what ends up happening, of course, is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, this is a no-go for me, because these gods are not my gods. The God is our God. And so they go on, and of course you have people that essentially tell on Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, bring them in front of the king, and the king is like, look, if you will just do this one thing that I asked you to do, because you're already kind of serving me, you're already kind of up there and you're helping me out, I mean, then I'll kind of let it slide. Good. I mean, the king even says good. And he goes as far, I love that part. I've never really paid attention to that one. Good. If you just do what I ask you to do, then it could be water under the bridge. And instead, they're like, no, we're not going to do that. And what I'll do is I'll read some verses for you so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, okay? This wasn't a blind faith. They knew exactly what was going to happen. They had that much faith and that much understanding of who their God was, right? So in verse 17 it says, well, first of all, we'll start in verse 16. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, We have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. So they knew that God was not only capable of saving them from the fiery furnace, but that he was going to. But here's the other interesting part, right? Because here's where this understanding of chaos comes in, right? That the world is not always going to be perfect. But at the end of the day, the way that you compose yourself as a Christian is that not only do you hold yourself, stand up straight with your shoulders back in good times, but in an understanding that even if you're having bad times, even if you're struggling, that everything is going to be okay, right? So in verse 18, this is where we get into this. It says, "But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." So they said, look, even if stuff goes bad, we're still not going to worship your gods. Like, we still are not going to think that your gods are the God, because they're not. And this is where we're at with this. That's how much faith, that's how much competency and understanding of the entire situation and how this world works and who the God is. And I think that was amazing, an amazing, I guess, example from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you see it moving forward, how that plays out. I mean, they go into the fiery furnace and they're all right. It goes in and it says in verse 27, "And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on their bodies. The fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them." And that's how much power God has. That despite everything, despite the fact that he turned that fire up 7 times more, 7 times hotter than he normally would have to burn anybody else, nothing happened.
And that's crazy. Whenever you go back to how many people gathered to watch it, it was a big deal. Yeah,
it was a big deal. And you see his anger, and there's a lot of other things that I would love to point out. I mean, including the fact that in verse, where is it, right here, when it talks about how he heated it up 7 times, it says, it's in verse, okay, so therefore, verse 22, "Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." And something that resonates with me on this one is the fact that, you know, these men could be us. If we bog ourselves down with worry and fear, and we let everything that's going on around us, if we let it pull us down as Christians, we can be just like those men that were unprepared. They were unprepared for the heat that came out of that furnace, and because of that, it consumed them. And it's the same thing that will happen to us if we are unprepared. And that's why we have such this big emphasis on standing up straight with your shoulders back. Okay, and of course we can go on and on and on. Same with Esther, same with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and any number of people that God has allowed us to have insight into their lives as examples, and as an understanding of the fact that despite there being chaos, despite this world not being perfect, that he understands us bigger and better than anybody, and that at the end of the day, he wants us to stand up straight with our shoulders back and not to worry.